The dawn of May 19th, 1536 crept over the Tower of London like a confession no one dared to speak aloud. The air was cold, not with winter but with waiting. Every stone of the ancient fortress seemed to hold its breath. The Thames rolled silently below, carrying secrets that would never surface. And in that pale half-light the scaffold waited, a lonely wooden stage built not for justice, but for spectacle. Its boards still damp with morning dew. Its shadow long enough to swallow a queen. They came quietly, nobles, guards, courtiers, all summoned by the king to witness something no one would ever forget. Yet none spoke her name aloud. Because on this morning, the woman who had once commanded kings, reformed a church, and set a crown upon her head, would kneel as a traitor. Above the whispers, a single sound broke the stillness. The distant clang of iron gates. They said Henry VIII had imported an executioner from France, the finest swordsman money could buy. A luxury killing for the queen he once swore to love more than his own soul. No axe, no hesitation, just one flawless stroke, clean, merciful, rehearsed. But mercy has many disguises. And what the crowd was about to witness that morning was not mercy. It was a carefully staged erasure, the death of a woman twice, once in flesh and once in memory. The truth of what really happened here, the words she whispered, the faces she saw, and the horror the official records tried to bury, is darker, quieter, and far more human than the story's history left behind. Before we descend into the tower's final morning, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I love seeing how far the echoes of history travel. The morning mist still lingers over the tower, but the story of how Anne Boleyn reached this scaffold begins long before the blade was drawn. In the months leading up to that silent dawn, England's most powerful court was unraveling under the weight of suspicion, ambition, and fear. The king's eyes, once filled with desire for the woman who changed his faith and defied a pope, had turned cold. Henry VIII, a man consumed by the need for a son, had begun to see and not as his triumph, but as his mistake. Behind the polished doors of Whitehall Palace, whispers thickened like smoke. Servants carried messages between ministers, secretaries sealed letters with trembling hands. At the center of it all stood Thomas Cromwell, the king's most calculating advisor. Once Anne's ally, he now saw in her downfall the key to his own survival. Their quarrels had grown venomous, each word in council a hidden blade. Anne wanted mercy for the poor, and Cromwell wanted control of the church's gold. The clash was inevitable. And so a plan began to take shape, not in daylight, but in the dark corners of the court. One by one, men close to the queen were accused of treasonous love, of sin against their king. Mark Smeaton, a court musician, was the first to fall. He was interrogated for hours, his confession torn from him like flesh from bone. Later, when they asked him why he lied, he simply said, "Fear made me do it." Soon after came Sir Henry Norris, the king's oldest friend, Francis Weston and William Brereton, men of charm and lineage, and finally George Boleyn, Anne's own brother. They were bound together not by guilt, but by proximity to a doomed queen. Letters from the imperial ambassador Eustace Shopweis whispered of a trial already decided. He wrote that and was condemned before she was heard. Even among her enemies, there was unease, a sense that this was not justice, but theater. When the queen was arrested, the air inside the tower changed. The fortress that had once welcomed her with music and pageantry now received her with silence. The same stone walls that had echoed with the birth of a new faith now trapped its maker. And was assigned 4 women, ladies she knew well, but they were not there for comfort. They were spies, placed by Cromwell to record every word she spoke, every tear she shed, every sigh she uttered in the night. "They note my every breath," she told Kingston, the tower's constable. "But I will give them nothing to report." The days blurred. The accusations multiplied. Witnesses swore to impossible meetings, dates that contradicted each other. The court demanded a confession, but Anne gave them only calmness. To her accusers, she said quietly, "I do not say I have been faultless, but never disloyal to the king." Her trial was a spectacle dressed as law. The peers who once bowed to her now avoided her eyes. George Boleyn stood accused beside her, forced to hear charges so indecent that even the scribes hesitated to write them. Both were condemned. The sentence, death by sword, was announced not with outrage, but with practiced detachment, as if the realm itself were eager to turn the page. Back in her chamber, Anne folded her hands and stared at the crucifix above her bed. "If it be his will," she said softly, "I am prepared to meet death with a quiet mind." History would later say she was proud, defiant, unbroken. But perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps she was simply tired of being afraid. If stories like this move you, if you believe forgotten voices deserve to be heard again, give this video a gentle like. It helps more souls discover the truth that time tried to bury. And tell me where you're watching from tonight. I love to know how far these old echoes reach. Night descended upon the tower like a closing curtain. The sky above London was the color of bruised iron, heavy and still. Inside those walls, a queen awaited her final dawn. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, and each gust that slipped through the arrow slits carried the damp breath of the Thames. Somewhere beyond, the city slept. But inside the tower, time itself seemed to stop. Anne Boleyn knelt beside a small wooden table, her hands clasped around a crucifix so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. A single candle burned before her, its flame trembling in the draught. The shadows it cast against the stone walls danced like restless ghosts, swaying over the rough floor where she had paced for days. Sir William Kingston, the constable of the tower, stood nearby, solemn, watchful, bound by duty. He had seen many condemned before her, but none like this one, and did not weep or rage. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but unwavering. She asked him if he had heard when the swordsman would arrive. Kingston hesitated, then told her the truth. The man had come that evening, a skilled executioner summoned from France, known for ending life with a single merciful stroke. She nodded, almost relieved. "I hear he is very expert," she whispered, "and I have a little neck." Then she smiled, a small, trembling thing that broke the silence like a prayer. Kingston, hardened by years of duty, later wrote that she seemed at peace, though her eyes betrayed sleeplessness that no calm words could disguise. As the hour grew late, and requested a final confession, the priest entered softly, and she asked for the prayers to be spoken in English. An unusual defiance, a quiet echo of the faith she had helped to shape. The Latin words of the church no longer felt like hers. She wanted God to hear her in her own tongue. When the rites were finished, she asked for a small meal, a morsel of bread, a sip of wine. She ate slowly, as though tasting time itself. No music, no attendants, no jewels. Only the creak of the wooden chair, the soft drip of wax, and the wind moving through the cracks in the stones. Outside her door, the guards whispered. One murmured that the king had already made arrangements for the next day's wedding feast. Another hushed him, but Anne must have heard them. She looked toward the door and said softly, as if to herself, "He will be gentle with me, for I was his queen." Later, when Kingston entered once more, he found her kneeling again, her head bowed. She was murmuring over and over, "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul." Her voice carried no fear, only fatigue. He recorded later that she slept a little and very soundly. But perhaps that was only the version fit for record, a sentence meant to soothe the conscience of those who ordered her death. Because in truth, the tower was not silent that night. The crows did not sleep. The river murmured beneath the walls. And if one listened closely, one might have heard the soft rhythm of pacing feet long past midnight. Some say that, in those final hours, Anne asked Kingston to promise that her body would be treated gently, that her ladies would gather her remains before the crowd dispersed. She spoke not of vengeance, but of dignity. "Tell them I die in the faith of Christ," she said, "and may God have mercy on my soul and theirs." Toward dawn, the candle burned low. The flame sputtered once, twice, and went out. The cold crept closer, and in the dim gray light, Anne Boleyn rose to her feet. She straightened her gown, folded her hands, and waited for the knock that would summon her to the green. If you were standing in that tower tonight, just beyond her door, hearing her whisper her final prayer, what would you have told her? Would you have spoken comfort, or simply listened in silence? Leave your thoughts below. I read every one of them. And if this story moves you, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, because there are many more forgotten nights history still keeps in the dark. The first light of morning crept over the tower, soft and pale, brushing the gray stone with the faintest warmth. The air was damp with dew, and a low mist hung like a shroud across Tower Green. From the narrow windows of her chamber, Anne Boleyn could see it. The small wooden platform raised in the center of the lawn, the straw laid thick around it to soak the blood before it reached the soil. A handful of people had gathered in silence. Courtiers in dark cloaks, guards gripping halberds, and a few women from the Queen's household, their faces pale beneath their hoods. The king himself was far away, celebrating his freedom before his wife was even gone. But here, in this enclosure of stone and fog, all eyes waited for one thing. the fall of a single blade. At mid-morning, the heavy doors opened, and stepped out between two attendants. Her gown was of gray damask, simple but finely made, her mantle of scarlet velvet trimmed in ermine. Around her neck hung a small cross of gold. She moved slowly, her steps deliberate, her posture unbent. To those watching, she seemed almost weightless, as though already half departed from the world she was leaving behind. Sir William Kingston walked beside her. No words passed between them. The only sound was the rustle of her gown against the wooden stairs as she ascended the scaffold. When she turned to face the small crowd, a hush fell so complete that even the crows were still. Her eyes swept the faces before her, some cold, some sorrowful, a few tearful, and then she spoke. Her voice was clear, steady, and unnaturally calm. "Good Christian people," she began, "I am come hither to die according to law." She paused, her breath visible in the morning air. "I do not accuse any man, nor do I speak against the law or the king's justice. I pray for his majesty, that he may long to reign over you, and I beg you all to pray for me." She lifted her face toward the sky, her voice softening. "God have mercy on my soul. To Jesus Christ I commend my spirit." Then she removed her headdress, handing it gently to one of her ladies. Beneath it, her dark hair was coiled tightly, the curve of her neck pale against the scarlet of her mantle. She knelt upon the straw, tucking her skirt carefully beneath her knees, as though mindful of modesty even now. The executioner, a tall man in black, stepped forward. His sword lay hidden behind the platform. He had sworn to make the stroke so swift that she would not feel it, and turned to her ladies and whispered a few last words none of them ever repeated. Then she knelt straight, folding her hands, and began to pray again. "O Lord, have mercy upon me. To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord, receive my spirit." The executioner removed his shoes so the boards would not creak. He motioned to his assistant, who distracted her with a brief cry of "Bring me the sword." Anne turned her head instinctively. The blade flashed once through the mist. There was no scream, only the sharp, dry sound of steel meeting flesh, and the dull thud of the body collapsing upon the straw. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence was absolute, then a low sob escaped from one of her attendants. The executioner lifted the severed head by its hair, showing it to the witnesses. The eyes were said to have flickered once, though perhaps that was only the trembling of hands. The women moved quickly, wrapping the body and the head in white cloth. There was no coffin prepared, only an empty chest that once held arrows. They laid her within it, sealing the lid with nails that split the morning quiet like tiny thunderclaps. The crowd began to disperse. Some crossed themselves. Others turned away without a word. Within an hour, the platform was cleared, the straw burned, the ground raked clean. And where a queen had knelt moments before, there was nothing left but the faint impression of her knees pressed into the earth. The tower returned to silence. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke from the kitchens where servants were already preparing for the king's next feast. The river rolled on, indifferent and endless, carrying the echoes of that morning out to sea. Thus ended the life of Anne Boleyn, Queen of England for 1,000 days, condemned for crimes that even her enemies doubted, and executed with the precision of ceremony rather than the fury of justice. The sword had done its work, but her shadow remained. The scaffold was gone by midday, dismantled as if it had never existed. Yet the silence it left behind lingered over the tower like a stain that no washing could remove. Beneath the gray flagstones of St. Peter ad Vincula, the arrow chest containing Anne Boleyn's remains was carried quietly into the chapel. There was no inscription, no hymns, no procession. Only the echo of boots, the low mutter of a priest, and the scent of wet earth. Outside, London stirred. Word of the Queen's death spread through taverns and marketplaces faster than the river tide. Some whispered that justice had been served. Others crossed themselves in secret, muttering that the king had slain his own soul. But no one spoke too loudly. The air in the city was thick with caution. Every tongue measured its words. At Whitehall Palace, preparations for another wedding had already begun. The very next morning, couriers galloped between estates, carrying orders for silks and jewels. Jane Seymour, the woman who would replace the condemned queen, waited quietly under guard, soon to become both wife and symbol of renewal. To the court, it was as though Anne had never existed. Henry VIII appeared in public the following day, dressed in white, smiling. He ordered church bells to ring across the city, not for mourning, but for celebration. To those who had served Anne, the sound was unbearable. To those who feared the king, it was a warning written in the air. Love could be revoked, crowns could be taken, names could be erased. Within the tower, the women who had attended the execution moved like ghosts. Some refused to eat. Others wept as they packed the queen's garments into chests that would soon be claimed by the crown. Kingston wrote that her head and body were buried within the chapel before the high altar, and that he prayed God would grant her soul peace. But even in that small kindness, he did not use her title. She had already been stripped of it. Beyond the walls, the queen's name was being removed from documents, portraits, and court records. The great tapestry she had commissioned of her coronation was quietly taken down. The motto she had chosen, "The Most Happy," was scraped from the marble base that once stood at the palace gate. In less than a week, England had rewritten its memory of her. Yet the people could not entirely forget. In marketplaces and whispers, rumors began to circulate, of omens seen over the tower that night, of a headless woman wandering the chapel stairs, of crows gathering on the scaffold long after it had been burned. The city tried to move on, but superstition filled the void that truth had left behind. By the time the king remarried, and story had become a warning rather than a tragedy, a parable whispered to courtiers' wives. Never rise too high, never speak too boldly, never forget that a smile can turn into a sentence. Still, her blood had marked more than the straw. It had marked the conscience of a nation. The woman who was erased had forced the world to change. The church, the crown, the very shape of England's faith. All had shifted because she had once lived. If this story makes you feel something, grief, anger, or awe, let it be known. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read them all. And if you want more truths like this, the ones history tried to bury, like this video and subscribe to Cursed Chronicles. Together, we'll keep these forgotten voices alive. Centuries have passed since that morning, yet the shadow of Anne Boleyn never lifted from the tower. Her story did not end with the stroke of a sword, it only began to echo. The very institution that condemned her was reshaped by her death. In the years that followed, England's faith fractured, its monarchs trembled, and her daughter, the infant Elizabeth declared a bastard, would one day sit upon the same throne that killed her mother. It is a strange kind of justice. The king who destroyed and to secure a son left only daughters, and the child he tried to erase grew into the sovereign who would define an age. Under Elizabeth's reign, the kingdom that once silenced her mother's name rebuilt its pride around the image of a powerful queen. The irony was so complete that some called it divine. It is a strange kind of justice. The king who destroyed and to secure a son left only daughters, and the child he tried to erase grew into the sovereign who would define an age. Under Elizabeth's reign, the kingdom that once silenced her mother's name rebuilt its pride around the image of a powerful queen. The irony was so complete that some called it divine. Anne's resting place remained hidden for generations. Her name, once forbidden, faded from stone and scripture alike. The chapel that held her bones became crowded with others who shared her fate, nobles, traitors, the forgotten. But when restorers opened the vaults in the 19th century, they found a woman's remains laid in the very spot Kingston had described. Her neck was unusually slender. The arrow chest had long rotted away, but the story inside it had not. Historians still argue whether she was guilty or framed, whether she was ambitious or misunderstood. Yet her influence cannot be denied. She altered the course of England with her rise, and with her death she proved that no power, not even royal blood, could silence truth forever. Some said her spirit was seen in later centuries, walking the tower's corridors, carrying her head beneath her arm, pausing at the altar where she had been buried. But perhaps the haunting was never meant to frighten. Perhaps it was a reminder that power built on fear will always meet its shadow, and that the memory of a wronged woman has more endurance than any throne. And so, as the centuries turned, and Boleyn ceased to be a villain or a victim, she became something else entirely, a mirror held up to history's cruelty and to its justice. Her voice, though lost to time, still murmurs beneath the stones of the tower, carried by every gust of wind that moves through its gates. The story ends where it began, in silence. The river flows beneath the walls, indifferent as ever, and the city hums beyond. But if you stand there at dawn, when the mist rises over Tower Green, and listen closely, you might still hear her final prayer drifting through the fog. To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Even now, her legacy refuses to sleep. The tower that once confined her has become a shrine to curiosity. Its stones carry the murmurs of millions who come seeking the truth of that morning. They trace their hands over the names etched into memorial plaques, whispering the story of a woman whose courage outlasted her flesh. In the centuries that followed, Anne Boleyn's image was reborn from fragments. Letters she wrote in confinement, records of her trial, fragments of jewelry, and the surviving words of those who once feared to defend her. What began as the tale of a fallen queen became the legend of a voice that would not die. She was the spark that broke the papal chain around England, the catalyst for a new order, and the mother of one of history's greatest rulers. And yet, beyond politics and power, there is something quieter that endures. The memory of a human heart betrayed by the very crown it helped to build. She entered history as a seductress and left it as a symbol, a woman punished not for her sins, but for her strength. Every age rediscovers her in its own way. Artists paint her as a martyr. Historians strip her story bare in search of motive. Storytellers return to her because she embodies what time never erases: ambition, fear, love, and the unbearable cost of being seen. To walk through the tower today is to walk through her shadow. The air feels colder near the chapel. The grass, forever green over her burial place, bends differently when the wind passes. Some say it is superstition. Others say it is remembrance. And Boleyn's life reminds us that history's cruelty does not always win. The voices it tries to silence often become the ones that echo the loudest centuries later. Hers is not just a story of death, but of endurance, of how truth, once spoken, refuses to be buried. If you've journeyed with me through her final hours, let this story linger with you. Tell me where you're watching from, and let me know if you felt the weight of her story as it unfolded. Your comments breathe life into the past, your likes help it reach new eyes, and your subscription ensures that these echoes, these cursed chronicles, continue to rise from the silence of forgotten history. History has a way of reshaping the dead. What was once scandal becomes tragedy. What was once condemned becomes revered. In time, Anne Boleyn transformed from a fallen queen into something far more enduring, a symbol of defiance carved into the soul of a nation. Her enemies tried to erase her, but they could not erase her influence. The English Reformation, born from her marriage, broke centuries of religious rule and forever altered the balance of power between crown and church. Her daughter, Elizabeth, became the living vindication of her struggle, ruling with the intelligence, conviction, and quiet fire that once defined her mother. Under Elizabeth, England entered its golden age, yet the shadow of the scaffold never fully left her court. Every triumph bore the faint echo of that morning in 1536. Writers and poets resurrected and in ink, shaping her into an enigma, saint to some, siren to others. Painters sought to capture the eyes that changed a kingdom, though no portrait was ever agreed upon. In each attempt, there is something haunted. The trace of a smile that knew too much, a gaze that seemed to see the end long before it came. The tower itself became her memorial. Guards reported flickering lights in the chapel at night, a soft rustle of silk on the stairs, a figure gliding where none should walk. Visitors spoke of a woman kneeling near the altar, her lips moving soundlessly in prayer. Whether ghost or memory, she has never left the place where she fell. Centuries have turned the story of Anne Boleyn into a mirror for every generation that looks upon it. To some, she is a lesson in ambition. To others, she is proof of how power fears the intelligent woman. But beyond the politics and legends lies something simpler, a life that burned too brightly in a world unready for its light. And so the tale endures, bound not by the cruelty of her death, but by the strange immortality of her defiance. In the hush before dawn, when London is still and the river moves like liquid glass, one might imagine her spirit watching, not with anger, but with quiet knowing. For though the sword silenced her voice, it could not stop her story. And in that, she won the only victory that ever truly matters, to be remembered. And so, 5 centuries later, her story still breathes. It slips through the corridors of the tower, through the cracks of time itself, whispering of love turned to power, and power turned to ruin. The stones remember her footsteps. The river remembers her silence. History may have crowned and buried many kings, but none left a mark quite like hers. And Boleyn's life was brief, but it carved an indelible wound into England's conscience. She was the spark that ignited a kingdom's transformation, the mother of a queen who would rule the world's seas, and the woman who taught us that legacy is not defined by how we die, but by what refuses to die with us. Every empire writes its story in blood and parchment, but Anne's was written in something deeper, in memory. No decree, no erasure, no blade could silence it. Her name endures because it stands for something timeless. The cost of truth, the price of ambition, and the haunting endurance of love and courage betrayed. If you've stayed with me through her rise, her fall, and her quiet immortality, thank you for walking these dark corridors of history. Tell me where you're watching from. I love to see how far her story travels, how her echo finds new hearts across the world. And if you wish to keep uncovering the forgotten and the forbidden, the buried and the beautiful, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles. Each story here is a voice resurrected, a reminder that even in silence, history still speaks. Give me a detailed image prompts to generate 5 images to use as B-rolls for the above, and put the prompt where the image should appear in the script. Not hyper-realistic, painterly.